The sun is setting on Watch Dogs, but what is it that draws me back to a game like this, a game so seemingly compromised? Well, simple answer, it's this. It's walking through it. It's the fact that underneath the story and the QuickTime hacks and those godforsaken police scans, underneath the bugs and the dismal side content and Damien pissin' Branks, underneath the disappointment is a vivid world, and one of the single best capturings of the atmosphere of urban noir in the modern gaming landscape. Usually, Watch Dogs looked one of two ways: grey, lifeless, drab, nothing like what we were shown or what we hoped for from the 8th generation, and I think one of the ugliest games of its time. Or grey. Okay, now that's the grey of life. That rain, and it understood that hazy fog, and the wind whips your coat, your hands are in your pockets, and amidst a gaggle of umbrellas and hunched shoulders, you walk slowly, calmly, unprotected from the torrent, because this is where you're truly at home. Now that's fucking noir. It understood that it mattered to get the color of the streetlights right. And this was not an interactive world, but you could ride the train, screeching, vandalized, warmed on the inside by dim yellow lights. I think for the same understanding. I like Watch Dogs for the same reason I like its soundtrack. It plays the right notes. Watch Dogs was one of the few games of its time that successfully married an ambition to realism with strong stylization, and perhaps the only game to bring the aesthetic of noir out of the past, replace the cigarette smoke with a high-tech heart. Bloom was the center of Watch Dogs' noir, implied by brushstroke, to be the root of the city's darkness, their machinations as cloaked as you in guarding shadow, as though the camera and the stalker were one. It's beautiful. And if Watch Dogs ever managed to say anything about the things Bloom stood for, that was how. Watch Dogs was a disappointment. Everybody knows that. A lethal reckoning of the decent game we got and the masterpiece we hoped for. But why did we hope for so much? Anyone who sells you a simple answer's lying. GTA was hot and this was that kind of game. It had a marketing spend that could send you and a +1 to Mars. It promised, by choice or not, to be a true beginning to the 8th generation. It held all the hopes we had for something more. That was rocket fuel. But there was one more thing. The spark. The idea. Watch Dogs was a really fucking cool idea. From its tech and its tone, it assembled a collection of some of the strongest fantasies of our time. Who wants to be invisible and to know what everyone else is hiding? Well, only just about every introvert alive. It tapped into the smartphone wave, rationalizing magic spells with an iPhone app. You didn't need to be chosen by a wand, you already had one in your pocket. Who wants to make the traffic lights green, or to make the train stop, or to take money from the rich? A lot of people. Who wants to be Batman? Or the Punisher? Aiden Pierce was a modernized fulfillment of the archetype of the dark vigilante, and Chicago played its part as his Gotham beautifully, the city being a manifestation of our collective paranoia, all the things that make us feel unsafe, which now included corporate control and the surveillance state, the other being one who brings order to that chaos and smashes the bullies back into the dirt. Revenge. For as long as the world has been a dangerous place, the Dark Knights have possessed a powerful appeal, and the game seemed to suggest that it would look at this man with a critical eye, sort of take the Heisenberg approach. Now, how much of that I believed is one thing, but no one could fault you for thinking that was a damn fine idea. People still want to play that Watch Dogs. I still want to play that Watch Dogs, and I can, but only in still frames, in brief moments, when the sky is just right. When I return to Watch Dogs, I find myself wanting to love it more than I do, hoping each time to see something deeper, something I missed. Not ever am I unentertained, but I'm always, as I have always been for more than a decade, disappointed. No one expects Watch Dogs to set the standard for a new generation of gaming anymore, or to trade blows with GTA 5. But man, I still wish it was the game it actually wanted to be. And I'm not the only one. Some people, possibly as delusional as I am, have tried to make a better Watch Dogs, and it's buggy. It's flawed. It doesn't fix the game, nothing could. But the reason I want to talk about it is that it did something remarkable. This time, I wasn't disappointed. So, you want to be a Watch Dogs, huh? Well, to do that, you're going to need to know how to code, and unfortunately, it's not as easy as it looks in-game. but I was able to go from basically knowing nothing to having a good baseline understanding of Python in less than 30 minutes using boot.dev. The thing is, boot.dev understands that the best way to learn is by doing what you'll be doing on the job, and the best way to doing is by not being bored. So it's fun. Expertly designed for my gamer brain with blips and bloops and points and streaks, as brief a read as possible, and video tutorials that find a way not to waste the first 5 minutes telling you about their favorite cereal brand or whatever. Boot.dev can teach you back-end web development from start to finish in Python, C, JavaScript, and just about anything else. It can teach you basic cryptography too, Linux, even pub sub-architecture in RabbitMQ, which probably means something cool. They can't teach you how to rack up slow-mo headshots and tank explosions, you'll need to be subscribed to me for that. But apparently, it can teach you how to get a job, so that's nice. Yeah, that's nice. So go to boot.dev and try out the courses free. Using code WhiteLight can knock off 25% from your first purchase, the entire year if you go for the annual plan. Watch Dogs has been remastered. I hate remasters. I love what remasters could be, and I value the fact that they have made many a classic game available to those who only own an 8th or 9th gen console. But, you know, you could have done that with a port, which would be much less likely to do the artistic harms that remasters usually do. I hate what remasters have turned out to be. Not the opportunities of a game's creators to come back and do what time and technical limitations didn't allow the first time, but instead the contracts of third-party companies to lather on as much makeup, Botox, and filters as the shoestring budget will allow, to look maximally improved in the completely decontextualized environment of the trailer and the YouTube comparison video. What's actually good for the experience has nothing to do with it. Fuck it, man, just throw a massive beaming orange sun into Assassin's Creed 3. Surely playing notes of comfort and sympathy as loudly as possible in an environment meant to be cold and harsh won't affect the experience at all. Who cares how it works in the game? It looks good in a YouTube comparison video. Yeah, fuck up all those obviously non-intentional brightness and color grading choices from Assassin's Creed 2 and Dark Souls. And what a fucking absurd notion it would be if the devs intended to create a dreamlike and painterly effect. Come on, just make everything more HD. Look at this shit! The Ezio collection is like taking away a witch's circlet of youth, then handing you a better pair of glasses and saying, isn't she beautiful? Not really. No.
Tu as les mêmes bugs, tu as les mêmes problèmes, tu as les mêmes défauts, tu as le même gameplay.
Return to Arkham. Just what? Don't get me started on this shit, man, or I'm gonna have to rewrite the title of this fucking video. Just suffice it to say that if you've only played Return to Arkham, you owe it to yourself to play the actual Arkham games, not this my first time in Unreal Engine fucking breach of the Geneva Convention for Crimes Against Atmosphere and Cohesion looking ass piece of shit. Return to fucking crayons, more like. God damn, man, get this shit off my screen. Look, the point of this rant is that it's a lot for me to say that I actually like an attempt to remaster a video game. But what's happened to Watch Dogs stands against these trends and is an example of what the remaster can be. It all started for Watch Dogs with a community effort to make the game look like it did in the infamous E3 2012 demo, which really did look awesome. So detailed, so richly noir, with such deep blacks and intense rain. A long-running myth went around that the game actually came with the E3 settings, and all you had to do was go into the config files and turn them on. As Watch Dogs' top graphics modder explains to me, that was never the case.
The game ships some old lighting presets, essentially XML files, that don't even work with the finalized lighting system and shaders. They were just labeled E3.clear, E3.storm, and such, which have parameters that control the intensity of certain effects, colors, and other things on a time of day and weather basis.
Using those XML files, attempts would be made for several more years to recreate the E3 look. You might have noticed the showcases that flooded YouTube, and the fact that they never really came close in spite of what the titles might have promised. Ray-traced global illumination? Really? You did that with a reshade? Come on. There was a tendency with the early graphics mods to look, in every sense, maximal. Just add more graphics, bigger lighting, bigger reflections, fuck it bro, make everything red. Actually wait, make everything green. And this was, despite my childish jabbing, understandably to the taste of some, but perhaps more fairly characterized as alterations rather than improvements. They often ran poorly too, I'm told why.
There's this file called default render config.xml, in which you can control various parameters like LOD distances, shadow quality, reflection quality, water, etc. Those mods used to crank several of those settings to ridiculous levels. Also, many of them included a texture pack that claimed to improve performance, but all it did was remove MIP mapping from most common textures, which makes them horribly aliased and is actually very bad for performance.
I spoke to a lot of people involved with Watch Dogs modding. All of them view the period of obsession with E3 parity as a time now past, and few of them seem in any way to regret that. The limitations are what they are. A fact whose slow acceptance led to something far more important, the acceptance that it doesn't matter. Why look backwards when we could look forwards? Why should living up to a demo be the highest goals of those with the power to improve Watch Dogs? What if the best looking Watch Dogs isn't the one Ubisoft had in 2012, but the one we can create? The Fall of the Windy City is what I want a remaster to be. New lighting solutions, better textures, pronounced colors, more skyboxes, moon shadows, a darker night, and a clear day that looks, well, not great, but not awful anymore, which I think is probably a first. It looks more gooder. Crucially, it does that with a distinct awareness of what's best for Watch Dogs, rather than what stands out in a comparison video. Nearly everything done by the Fall of the Windy City brings Watch Dogs toward realism, a natural look instead of the explicit stylization of Revival or PS4 relaunch. It's more like real life for colors not to be desaturated. It's realistic for places without light to actually be dark, for indirect lighting to exist, and for the moon to cast shadows. If part of the appeal of Watch Dogs is its aesthetic of plausibility, then realism can have a direct benefit. If another part of the appeal is its sense of life, then pronounced colors could too. But the truly impressive thing about the realism of this mod is how it nevertheless manages to bend the look of Chicago toward Watch Dogs' neo-noir style, rather than away. Style through realism. And it does that with darkness. It does that by emphasizing the difference between the dark and the light, bringing a truly vast enhancement to tone and aesthetic drama. Indeed, it comes close to resembling the clair-obscure lighting of film noir itself, where the severe contrast between light and dark becomes strongly symbolic. Good and evil, the exposed and the hidden. Watch Dogs inherits a similar power. Aiden lurks deeper and broods more darkly in this vastly deeper dark. His headlights on an unlit road become a piercing glare, eyes in the brush. Watch Dogs might now contain some of the most tonally dramatic alleyways in all of interactive media, deeply intense expressions of paranoia and the urban hunt. And Blackout, one of Watch Dogs' coolest ideas, so much more dramatic now that the dark you pull things into is that much more pronounced. Based simply on raising the effect of Blackout, the emotional response changes completely. This is a public inconvenience, meant to aid in your escape, but this makes people scared, because it means they can't see. That's more Aiden. That's more Watch Dogs. That's more interesting too. The darkness can disadvantage you if you don't use it smart. People never did tend to actually use Blackout that much outside of the novelty of its visual drama. What I find so fascinating about my latest run is that I began to, because the darkness makes its actual mechanical effect intuitive. The answer to the question, how much does Blackout reduce enemy sight cones, was never completely obvious. Now, it's pretty much by the amount that you would expect given the level of darkness. That makes it intuitive, and for me that gave rise to the confidence to actually give it a try, which I did, which was awesome. Using this dramatic dark to slip by the police was one of my favorite things about the many things the mods have done to the police. It's fascinating the way improvements such as these can become their own critiques of the subject. Apparently, it was perfectly legitimate to say that Watch Dogs was too bright, but no one ever did. I think it was a mistake to minimize the fog during storms, and I just don't think that the bluer tint works as well as the grey. It's like a 10's gone down to an 8.5. But the Fall of the Windy City makes up for that minor stumble by contributing completely new skyboxes to the times of dawn and dusk, oftentimes moody but hopeful pictures of the sun's light beginning to wash over the tops of dark clouds and softly diffuse through their gaps. They fit perfectly. My experience with a typical remaster is more like a feeling of intrusion. Something is here that doesn't belong. Something is forcing itself upon the game. Something is missing. My experience with this, on the other hand, is the rare and apparently great pleasure of discovering something new within the familiar, a vibe I knew well and found comfort in, growing, naturally developing. These new feelings fit so well inside of Watch Dogs that it's as though they were always meant to be there. That is what I'm talking about. That is what a remaster should be, baby. By tradition, remasters leave the content of a game untouched, besides bundling in the DLC. So this is where the metaphor breaks, and the new Watch Dogs becomes more like Watch Dogs Revised. Games are complicated. Games are so deeply interconnected and their elements so deeply interdependent that they can fall apart like a house of cards or magically reassemble based on the design of a single minor element. The amount of darkness affects the intuitability of a hack, then its usability, then the character and quality of the police. The balancing of crafting materials in Far Cry affects incentives to do optional content, then variation, pacing, the likelihood of being exhausted by extended periods of movement, and ultimately, the characterization of the entire experience, as the exploratory impulse is almost never acted upon in a game that frames itself as an adventure. So now let's talk about The Living City, a mod that answers as well as it can the right question. What can we add to Watch Dogs? The Living City's central interest is fixing up the open world, which, yeah, I would say probably needed fixing. There's life, sure, but life to look at, not life to play. And the main thing that does is make for an open world that's not very mechanically engaging when you're not in a mission. To fulfill the role of the vigilante, you had a sum total of one activity, which inevitably became tiresome, and Chicago was otherwise a glorified mission select screen for a vast scattering of nothing content. But the weirdest thing was how many activities there were that just didn't make sense. Sightseeing logs, street-side minigames, and AR challenges put you in the shoes of a tourist. And for the social media-obsessed zoomer like Marcus Holloway, it works, but not fucking Aiden Pierce. You could hit cash registers. Why? What the fuck would Aiden Pierce be doing holding up a coffee shop? This isn't a crime sim, but it was clear that to some degree, the game had bought into the idea that it had to be its own GTA. The Living City's basic act is to introduce activities that do make sense for Aiden Pierce, and that happen without the player having started a mission. It adds those previously absent dots and flares of abnormality to the base game's convincing portrait of day-to-day life. Basically, it's random events. You will be ambushed at random times or as a trap, in force or by a single gunman. There are street races that will happen with or without you. There used to be firefighters, now there are ambulances too. Citizen hacks are expanded with kills for the evil player and donations for the generous. Exclusive contracts are generated with a truly massive range of potential conditions. Police chases occur without your involvement, and you'll be rewarded for helping with the takedown. Online invasions can now happen against offline bots. There are decryption events, large heists that have you escape the police or bust a convict out of a transport, and there's a general spawning of enemy factions throughout the city. The city is alive, convincingly so. This breadth might imply chaos. It's true, a sense of life is a delicate thing, and too much shit going on can point more toward clockwork than a soul. But despite the amount of things that can happen, it does happen at a managed pace, and the spontaneity of the world is constantly, effectively juxtaposed against periods of stability. The randomness reads as life. This life then begins to actively immerse as the city continually validates the premises of the story. Watch Dogs tells us about a dark and layered high-tech neo-noir underworld, but it's only now that the game can show us that world actually exists outside of the missions. And it is precisely this connection that delivers us to the fantasy. That shit's awesome. That vibe is what I came for. Sudden emergences of the fixer underworld, accepting contracts and watching from the shadows. That used to be how the game looked and what the game implied. Now, it's the game you actually play. That's not a small difference. Events that require the use of specific weapons could have restricted your inventory as soon as you accepted the contract. Instead, you're asked to equip yourself from a duffel bag left on the side of a dark road, because the mod author understands that half the convenience is worth twice the tone. It is a very distinct thing that rather than events being selected from a map, it is the open world itself that produces the activities, so it's random events. It's not more one-time missions, which the base game had in abundance. That's a very distinct design strategy, and what the random event can't do very well is complex narrative. But beyond their unique ability to enliven the world, a more material consequence of the random event is surprise, the unexpected, the unintended, a way to contribute variation to games where trips through the open world can become predictable. That's life in another sense, and it's something far too many games like this lack. There's something else, something harder at first to see, but something far more meaningful. The way you access an activity affects the way it feels. Aiden's access point into the substance of the game is now his phone. The profiler, notifications reveal to him as he stalks the city, rather than selecting icons from a map. That's a big difference. The map is a question. It asks, what do you want to do next? It's about freedom. It fulfills a sense of adventure, likely because it was imported from games that were designed to do exactly that. But Watch Dogs is not Far Cry 3. Aiden is not going on an adventure. He's a vigilante living in a dark underworld of secrets. So Is the map the right fit to dominate and define the structure of our play? Perhaps not. Perhaps that's another way the Living City can reveal critique of the base game. But now it's different. Now we're asked a different question. Do you want to take the opportunity? So to do so is an act of opportunism, something I did because I had the chance. It's a recontextualization, and that context changes the event itself. I didn't schedule a race for this evening's entertainment. I took the job, and so when I'm doing the race, it's a job that I took. A different feeling. One more like Aiden, his character, his fantasy, and I feel the tone of those things. It's a remarkable success, furthered by the effort a certain handful of events make to imply narrative during their setup, which the doing of the event itself can then fulfill. For instance, you might find a contract by scanning a mobster in the back of a limousine, so now there's a story. It's not a deep one, in fact, it's about as shallow as it could possibly be, but it is a deeply atmospheric story, and that's what makes it substantial. Thing is though, there's no reason to engage with any of this. You're not forced, there's no incentive outside of rep and some cash, and cash really doesn't mean shit in this game. You have to want to do it for the same reason you hit the slow-mo button when there's about to be an explosion. You have to like it. You have to think what Watch Dogs wanted to be is cool. If you don't, then this is some added life to a game that could use it. But if you do, and that doesn't seem unlikely, then it's like the difference between a sketch and a final draft. Here's something else substantial. The Living City's got one more trick. It doesn't take long for events to spawn, but there is something you can do to find a contract faster. You can profile, you patrol the streets, or perhaps prowl would be the word. And this being Watch Dogs, it is some of the coolest prowling there is. You might have done this before, but only as a novelty, never with the purpose that the narrative implied Aiden was supposed to possess. If we are meant to be the vigilante, then this is the waiting part, the hunting, the looking out, and the build-up. This is legitimacy for the narrative, since now we actually get to be more of the character that the story describes, and an entirely new dimension for the previously lacking fantasy. And it is here, precisely when the Living City is silent, that its atmospheric effect is most pronounced. Walking, hands in pocket, coat rippling in the wind, looking and listening to the secrets of passers-by, waiting for an in. I won't use the word tone again, despite the fact that I just did, but suffice it to say, you can inject that shit straight into my veins, particularly because it's these streets. It's Watch Dogs streets where most of its most impressive strengths can be found. The small details of life and that sinful sense of prying. The Living City gives you a reason to view Chicago on this level as a baseline, and that is no small thing. It works as well as it does precisely because it works in harmony with the mods we choose to pair it with. The visuals of the fall of the Windy City establish the heightened tone, and the events create a pathway for you to engage and exist within it. Neither one would be quite so valuable without the other to give them purpose. And it's immersive because it looks better. It's immersive because it validates the suggestions of the story. But crucially, it's immersive because it allows you to think about the world like Aiden does. It brings the mind of the player and the character into closer alignment. And that is the true root of immersion. Indeed, that's why games that look like shit can still be immersive. It isn't the details that make something feel real, that just helps. It's the acting like it's real that makes you believe it, and that is a matter of game design. Immersion has a consequence beyond itself. Being immersed in the role of the vigilante put me in a strong position to do something I never thought I'd do, to view the reputation system as a valuable role-playing tool rather than a tertiary nuisance. And when that happens, regular missions can be complicated by concerns about harming the police, or finding a car as fast as possible without having to steal one, or the incentives to rescue innocents from firefights on the street. The narrative itself is elevated by the simple fact that the Aiden the story describes is actually the Aiden you're playing as and thinking like, outside of those cutscenes and conversations, which doesn't make it good, but it does make it less bad. Push the right domino and the effect of some cleverly implemented random events is felt from a mile away. The Living City's most ambitious idea is an event called Armor Plated. You suit up, mow down a horde of cops with a machine gun, and then wait for either Geordie or T-Bone to pick you up. Those are characters from the script, showing up in a random event, with cleverly reused dialogue to make the whole thing feel natural too. That's pretty cool, and a pretty rare sense of cohesiveness. They'll drive, you'll shoot. That's novel. And at various destinations you'll get out and hack a thing or shoot some men, which isn't, but it feels cool enough because of the slow brutishness of the suit. I don't know what happens at the end though. I've never made it that far. The likely reason Aiden is asked to suit up to do nothing he doesn't do in a leather coat every Tuesday afternoon is so that when you're riddled to fuck with a couple hundred submachine gun rounds in the passenger seat of the car, the damage you don't take is plausible. So basically, the drivers can't drive. Not the mod's fault, Watch Dogs never did have the cleanest chase AI, and that's what the mod has to repurpose. But it just can't get the job done when you're under physical pressure from numerous enemy vehicles. They'll crash it, then crash it again, they'll flip it, they'll repeatedly drive into a wall, and when the car's fucked, the event fails. So maybe Watch Dogs 4's waiting at the end. At this rate, I'll never know. I liked it, because I've never seen anything like it. Because I like Watch Dogs and I like new ideas, so the bullshit was worth it. And the small inconvenience of installing a mod serves as a natural filter for anyone who wouldn't feel like me. That's why I'm glad it's there. That's why it's better here than cut. But I'm gonna keep it real. I definitely would have liked it better if it worked. Thankfully, most of the new stuff does. Some events are no hacks, no map, reintroducing an element of tension and surprise. Some restrict weapons, so no cheese launchers or repetitive tactics. Some demand no detections, which is odd, because what they actually demand is no noise. And it's slightly irritating that you have to find that out the hard way. Decryptions are defend the point objectives. They work nicely, but they suffer on occasion from periods of very little resistance. So you're kinda just sitting on your ass, smoking a cig, waiting for the next one car to roll up, whose driver and passenger you will effortlessly dome through the windshield. But like I said, occasional. It's helpful that you can engage in all this without fear of someone calling the police. I mean, the police are still there, and people will still call them. The part that's been deservedly taken out back and put down like a rabid dog was the system that determined whether or not a chase would begin, the CTOS scan. Yeah, let's make the entire thing dependent on whether detection circles randomly spawn, and then just add in a sprinkle of skill potential, so maybe a good player can get away, but maybe not. Maybe they're coming after you faster than the fastest car in the game can drive. If you were deliberately designing for frustration, making people think they have a chance when they don't is how you do it. What happened? Be honest, Ubisoft. Did one of your senior designers have really white skin, really green hair, and a really wide red smile? Because that's my leading theory, and now it's gone. The game feels light without its weight. The new races are a more complicated matter. The big problem is that focus, slow motion, doesn't just make motion slow, it also affects the physics of the car to make tighter plays more accessible. The consequence of that is that you can use focus to get rid of unwanted momentum. Now, usually, that's what the brakes are for, and pushing brakes out of their own niche is not really what you're looking to do when you're designing a racing game, because braking well is the most skill-intensive part of driving. And it's a further problem since hacking the laws of physics kind of disagrees with the game's grounded aesthetic. For some racing games, this detraction of challenge would be a fatal problem. But Ubisoft, indeed most likely the part of Ubisoft who brought us Driver San Francisco, knew how to make an arcade racer. And that's what the Living City imports into the offline world. So traffic brings challenge and tension, shortcutting is permitted for you and your enemies, and hacks are on, but there's no auto-timing like there is with the police, so it's another stressor on your mental bandwidth to use them well. Nitro doesn't work like it does in most racing games. It's not a pool of heightened speed to be used as you please, but rather a commitment to a lengthy period of heightened speed. Once it's on, you can't turn it off, so big reward, big risk. That makes the decision of when to use it so much more interesting, and the act of using it so much more tense. Watch Dogs had burst nitrous 8 years before Need for Speed Unbound. Special conditions can make major changes. If there's a particular target to wreck, you're forced to balance progress in the race with proximity to the target. Sometimes an enemy faction will show up in force to shut down the whole race. In practice, that's oncoming traffic that's trying to crash into you. It's spectacle, but it's also a strong threat to entrenched race positioning. It helps to break down the unexcitement of certainty that can often develop during the late stages of any arcade race, and that's a really cool idea. The races are good, actually. A little more challenge would be nice, maybe a 10 to 15% boost to the AI drivers, but I can't say I've had more fun in a non-racing game than this. Some events are small and feel quiet and personal. Some events are big and feel public and spectacular. Some events are not very challenging, best taken as opportunities for you to optimize Aiden's cool. Some events are so challenging that they introduce a ceiling that never existed before, something for more experienced players to test themselves against. The breadth of content and form is remarkable already, but what adds to it is a multiplicative effect, as some random happenings overlap. A police chase can interrupt a potential crime. An ambush can complicate a hideout. When you consider this variety, in combination with how these events work to fulfill the game's tonal and narrative intentions, it becomes clear as to why the Living City is able to make the bad of Watch Dogs matter less. It can't fix the side content. There isn't a mod that tries, but there is no longer any pressure on that side content to be what there is to do when you're not doing missions. You can see how it matters less that so many of the interactions that the base game provided with Chicago felt completely out of tune with the character and the world they'd built, because so many is now not many. The endgame's fixed. Used to be the police was it. Not a bad time, but not even something a high rep player could do. Now, there's stuff, so that's taken care of, but that might be an understatement. What The Living City amounts to is almost a game unto itself. What I mean by that is, it provides an experience that feels complete on its own. You can do nothing but engage with the city, and the game still feels whole. It doesn't feel like something's missing. It won't run out of steam, or at least, I haven't got to the point where it does. That's cool, and it's really quite good. It is one of the best sandboxes of the Batman archetype that I have ever played, and it is one of the most effective improvements to a video game that I've ever seen from a mod. It is the best remaster of any game that I know, and it isn't one, which is a statement in itself. And more than any of those things, I really don't think I've ever seen anything quite like the open world it creates. I mean, I've seen a random event before, of course, but this is a lot of random events, an open world primarily driven by them, which is not normal for this kind of game. And not only do they themselves contribute to world building, atmosphere, and character, so does the way they present themselves, and the behaviors that encourages in the player. So does the gameplay loop, those things complete. Yeah, that is not an everyday thing, but it does kinda strike me. Why? Shouldn't it be? It's not doing anything new from a technological perspective, and using a part of a game to enhance the narrative isn't exactly plowing new depths of game design philosophy. I think, in doing its best to vitalize the open world of Watch Dogs, The Living City has, knowingly or not, provided an insightful critique of the game Watch Dogs used to be, and of the stagnancy and the creative deficiencies that we've become accustomed to in so many other open worlds like it. Ask yourself, in this kind of open world game, you know, the GTA superhero city-based kind, not so much the Elden Ring kind, what is the open world usually for? You can come up with some answers. It's a carefully detailed stage for the story, a distribution system for mission-based content, and a sandbox for one or two of the gameplay mechanics. Maybe it's got a bit of virtual tourism going for it too. But what it isn't, and what we seem not ever to expect it to be, is an important instrument of the game's narrative or artistic intentions. It might contain art, and it might contain more scripted missions, but not as often will it produce or permit interactions that have an artistic or narrative meaning. In fact, not so often will it provide that many interactions at all. You can usually engage in meaningless acts of violence and not much else, and rarely will anything happen without you having caused it. It's this that creates the common sense that character, theme, and the premises of the narrative are effectively paused when we're out in the open world, and it's that splitting of the mind of the player from the mind of the character that leads to a kind of immersive disconnect. It's also this that makes for open worlds that lack an element of surprise and feel empty, lifeless, and boring when the finite supply of scripted content it hosts inevitably runs dry. When you're out in Los Santos, you're fully aware that you're not really playing as a continuation of the character you are in the story. Michael stops once you've run over your first pedestrian. Franklin isn't there when you're stealing a jet from an airbase for no other reason than cowabunga. The problem not being that you're allowed to do these things, but rather that you're not allowed to do anything other than things like that. The premises, themes, and characters of the story are put on hold because the interactions you're provided with the open world do not allow them to persist. GTA isn't really a game about a career criminal. It's a campaign-driven story about a career criminal with a rampage sandbox attached to it. Both sides are excellent and indispensable, but which is the true GTA? What I really want to know is, what if you never had to ask? I think The Living City is an interesting answer. It's not the only answer, but it is a good one. Not only because it so effectively permits meaningful interactions, but also because it doesn't enforce them, so you can still have your rampage sandbox. I think it's one of the best uses of the open world in this kind of open world game, and it's done that to what used to be one of the worst. I think there's something to be learned from that. I think it's a splash of cold water in the face of modern design traditions. Wouldn't it be nice to finally have an Insomniac Spider-Man game whose open world was more than a movement sandbox and a handful of underwhelming random crimes, one with greater room to actually participate in Peter's life or perform Spider-Man's role? Isn't it strange that that still isn't the focus? This is Spider-Man, a character completely defined by his relationship to New York, and these Spider-Men are tied to narratives which constantly invoke that responsibility, that mantle, that pressure. But we don't play those things when we're out in their central arena. The Ubisoft approach, the map with icons for scripted missions, means that when anything meaningful happens, you expected it to happen. You intended it to happen. In a way, you made it happen. Is that the best fit? The story insists on the role of Spider-Man being a burden, but when we're let loose, we feel relief. We almost feel excused from responsibility. We're half excused from the character, because there's just not many ways to be him. So add some. More interactions and better interactions than the ones we have. Use surprise to break up expectedness and intention, because doing a thing in the moment as it calls out to you could far better communicate heroism and responsibility than scheduling an appointment with a mugging. It could even recontextualize the activity itself into an act of heroism. What if, sometimes, the scripted content introduced itself at random? I know a few activities that could benefit from a little recontextualization. What if there were just small things that sometimes happened in New York? An argument, a minor car accident, some fireworks going off. Because if you want to emphasize the hero's role, what you don't want to do is create an image of a city that is calm and stable as a baseline. It would mean life, which isn't really a problem as it stands, but I like better. It would mean variation and an open world that wasn't sometimes kinda boring. Make proper use of the open world in open world games. That's the lesson to take away here, because it does not happen enough. I did not expect a mod for Watch Dogs to show us a way, or perhaps most remarkably, for it to make Watch Dogs good. Fuck me. I did not expect to be able to use that word. I didn't believe it could happen, least of all at the hands of a mod, but of course it could. The hard part isn't the resources, it's knowing which dominoes to push, and man, was this one hell of a push. Watch Dogs had a lot of cool ideas, and I think one of the coolest had to be its take on invasions. Single player invaded by multiplayer. It takes that sense of expectedness and seclusion that comes naturally to offline play, that safety, and flips it in a moment to create a deep sense of dread and intrusion. But Watch Dogs wants those feelings to last, because that's such a Watch Dogs way to feel. I'm being watched, I'm being followed, I'm seeing something I shouldn't see. So in Dark Souls, the invasion leads to a fight, but in Watch Dogs, you're not supposed to find each other. The invader begins a hack, and he needs enough time for it to complete, so he hides within a known radius, and the player does the seeking. The brilliant part is, the invader appears to the player as any other NPC, so there's this really novel element of social stealth, where you can hide in plain sight by simply acting the part. You can't let them see you entering a vehicle or move out of step. The player covers ground and the circle shrinks, so there's a conflicting pressure on the invader to be able to relocate. NPCs don't get out of parked cars, and that's where so much of the tension comes from. So it works, as a cure for low blood pressure and as an expression of the world. But I always thought one of the coolest things about Watch Dogs invasions is what happens before it's even begun. You're not told that you've been invaded. It's their choice as to when to begin the hack, which means the invader gets to see something remarkable, something no one ever gets to see. The player from the perspective of the world. How strangely they fit in, how freely they discard social conventions, how funny and quirky it can seem, how different and unbelonging, and also how monstrous. It means nothing to them to steal a car or walk into traffic or shoot a stranger in the head, and it's only when you see it from the outside, the power fantasy from the perspective of the powerless, that it all seems so mad. It is madness to be the player. Maybe once when Watch Dogs intended to criticize Aiden Pierce, this perspective might have served a deliberate commentary. It's fascinating as it stands, but the real success is that we're seeing it without permission, and you know they feel so safe. So even more than the actual event itself, there is such a strong sense of intrusion. There's a sinful thrill to it, because you are, in a very real sense, invading another person's privacy and leering at their private acts. Watch Dogs already gives you webcams to stare through. This is as close as you could get to the real thing without actually having done something immoral. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe it should. How brilliant an expression of this world. A world that is so relevant to our own. How unique, how thrilling. But not anymore. When we wonder about the future of Watch Dogs, one thing seems sure. The online doesn't look likely to be in it. It's the usual way. Games age, people leave, and maybe the servers aren't worth the upkeep anymore. Sad thing is, now more than ever, preservation means protecting a game from its own creators. What can we do about that? Well, for one thing, we can tell its creators to fuck off, but that only secures potential. It's not going to keep people playing. What if there was another way? We can experience online races today for only one reason, that the Living City developed an offline translation of them. And sure, something is lost, but a future is gained. The mod becomes preservation, where the conventional remaster is so often comfortable with leaving the online components behind. Invasions are in a different situation. They don't have a population problem, at least not yet, and that is the reward of innovation. People stick around for an experience without comparison. But there's still a problem, just as inevitable. Sweats. Time makes good players better, and they keep playing, so new players run into a wall. They're denied the space to learn. They're denied fun. Yeah, invasions on my latest run weren't exactly the experience I remembered. The fun new strat is to spend the whole time hiding somewhere no one but a sweat would know how to reach. Well, that's riveting gameplay, really. Once, I was juggled with a grenade launcher. Juggled. They were doing trick shots with my body, with a weapon I didn't even have access to at the time I was invaded. I never even found out where it was coming from. Another guy lets me find him, and then drives away, knowing I'll never be able to catch up. Is this how it feels to be a dog's chew toy? Yes, I am mad, and yes, it is because I'm bad. What, do you think I'm losing sleep over it? Do you know how many YouTube subscribers I have? The point fucking is, sometimes preservation means protecting a game from its own player base, and the Living City tries. Remember that douche nozzle 2 times the tap? Yeah, he invaded my world too. That's because he's a bot. That's how Ubisoft wanted to tutorialize the concept, and now it can happen again, randomly. Offline invasions. Same principle, not quite the same success. It's a testament to the strength of the concept and its surrounding artistic context, how much of the feeling still comes through, that suspicion, even some of the tension. And the sweat problem is solved. But the AI doesn't make any attempt to hide, or to relocate when you're close. And of course, an AI doesn't have to try very hard to pretend to be an AI, so there's nothing to watch out for. They'll never be sitting, and they'll almost always be on their phone, but among the candidates, it comes down to a roll of the dice. 2 times the crap more like. It's not that bad, but it's plain to see there's only so much a mod can do. In particular, a mod for Watch Dogs. We can work with AI that already exists, that's why the races work, but we can't write an AI of our own. We're stuck with 2 times the twat. Or are we? Where's the line between a problem that can't be solved and a problem we don't know how to solve yet? That's the question the modders I spoke to struggled with the most. But that doesn't mean I couldn't push them into a guess. What problems might we be stuck with for good? One modder tells me we'll never achieve E3 parity. The builds are just too different, and we'll never fix the community who continues to falsely pretend otherwise. The story, obviously, since we have no access to voice actors, or as it turns out, animation tools. One modder tells me we can't fix Watch Dogs Legion. Not exactly relevant, but he's real as fuck for that. I ask with some specificity about the hacking. If we can revolutionize the open world, teach the AAA scene a lesson, if we can summon personal drivers, dealers, and bodyguards, if we can add garages, a perfectly functional rest mechanic, and an entire roguelike mode, didn't mention those things earlier, not that important in the grand scheme of things, which you'd be right to think says a lot, then why can't we hack more? Or better. I mean, no one wanted to open up their hacking game only to find that hacks were randomly assigned to enemies, obliterating intentionality. And rarely assigned to enemies too. And vehicle hack, such an obvious thing to port backward from later games. What's the hold up, guys? You've only been at it for 10 years. Well, my ass is sat down and educated thusly.
In Watch Dogs, vehicles can't move without an entity controlling them. An NPC, basically. Which is why things like helicopters have a driver even though you'd never see them. So already we run into the problem of only occupied vehicles being affected by this hack, and in order to get around this, you'd have to pull something insane like putting some kind of invisible NPC inside every parked vehicle at all times. The hack itself would have to be its own item as well. An item in the way a blackout is an item, or an IED, and remember, we have to rely on a lot of things that already exist in the game. We couldn't create a new item from scratch. All of the additional Living City items are things already utilized by the game in some way, just altered. So if we wanted a mass vehicle hack, we need an item that already exists and affects some kind of radius, maybe like jamming comms. We'd take the general function of the jam comms and apply it to every vehicle. We'd then run into another problem. These hypothetical entities controlling the vehicles wouldn't know what to do because there's no script for them to go out of control. We could try the traffic light hack behavior, but instead of cars going in random directions, they would all beeline into each other. There's much more work and so many layers involved. Most of the time, even if someone does start experimenting with something like this, they hit an impassable roadblock.
Well, looks like we're not getting Watch Dogs 4 then. It's obvious to me that there are wide gaps in modding ability as I go through my latest run. The police and factions have been completely overhauled thanks to the Living City, and police and factions overhaul. But despite the addition of plainclothes detectives, the FBI, and the ability of the police to use CTOS against you, which contributes meaningful expansions to fantasy, world building, and challenge, any chase can still be brought to a painless end by getting in a boat and leaving, same as it's always been. Any engagement with the police then still relies on a player's willingness to self-restrict out of the sea. But that becomes a much bigger ask in the face of higher challenge. There's more police, there's more kinds of police, the escape timer is much longer. I would actually say too long because any practical attempt to escape with the timer is going to involve a huge amount of waiting. The escape radius is much larger too, and I would also say too large, because sometimes it's larger than the region of the map you're in, which means the only way to escape is to use one of the few roads out of that region, which you can be damn sure will have a police checkpoint on it. So, you're stuffed. Or you could always use a boat. I felt more often than not that I was entertaining the idea of a police chase. It would usually end when I felt I'd made enough of an effort, at which point I'd find a way to excuse myself to the nearest coast, and that'd be that. But these mods change so much, so it does seem unlikely they just forgot about the fact that the police come with an off switch. We can change the balance, but how do we solve the existence of the sea? What is there to repurpose if we want to add police boats? The changing of Watch Dogs is a technical maze, and navigating it has taken more than a decade of ingenuity. Nothing is simple, and everything is strange. It wasn't so rare to sense a note of dejection and resignment in the people I spoke to, like they'd just come out of a shift at the coal mines. But for every black gap, and for just the same reason, an unexpected path seems open, and those same people were without contradiction, hopeful, and enthused. Sometimes they let me have a peek. They never let me get my hopes up. In those parts no one deals in certainties, but what remarkable dishes they seem to have warming up in the Might Be wave. Whistling? Hiding in dumpsters? I saw sonar goggles, seeker grenades, some kind of stun gun. I'm told about an attempt to overhaul the detail of the world with props and new interiors, and that to some degree significant changes can be made to the map. Some of the top guys in the graphics scene had a few ideas. One of them's come close to figuring out a heavily stylized look that doesn't just add lots of one of the primary colors. The future is bright, in a strange few ways, and I realize that's what excites me the most. I hesitate to sell the difficulty of modding Watch Dogs as a good thing, but it is a time-tested truth that limitation breeds creativity. As I'm told, so many of the remarkable things we have stem from the fact that the easy way didn't work, that the obvious thing wasn't enough, that something strange was the only way through. And for one modder, that was the attraction. I would have been happy to play a Watch Dogs without problems, but man was it cool to play a Watch Dogs I didn't expect. A game that did more than improve, a game that evolved, a game that at once was new and more itself, that offered the strange wonders of something familiar being able to surprise you again with things that feel like they always could have been there. Watch Dogs is more like Watch Dogs, and now there is nothing else quite like Watch Dogs, and so it is all the better that Watch Dogs is good. And I hope it reaches so much further. What a wonderful thing that would be. But the truth is, if it doesn't, I'd be okay with that, because I feel like I've already won. And I really needed that win. I know this might sound strange, but you gotta understand something about me. I've got a really bad relationship with missed potential. Remember those Deus Ex games? I'm kind of a fan. I'll put it this way. If I could make any game exist with a wish, anything, it would be the third and final installment to the modern trilogy. Mankind Divided is the second one, and it's half a game. It's half of one of the best games I've ever played, which makes the half that's missing quite irritating. Well, I don't know if you've been following the news, but it's been rough. It might be happening. It's been set aside so the studio can work on Marvel games. It's been sold to Embracer. Embracer decides to moonwalk off a cliff. They're pitching to other studios. They're turned down. They started work, they stopped, and now it looks like it's completely fucking dead. I'm gonna have a coronary. You wanna know what my most anticipated game in the AAA scene was for this year? Wonder Woman. Yep, fucking Wonder Woman, because it was being made by Monolith. Another spin on the Nemesis system, and Jesper Kyd on the soundtrack. Who would be better suited to the setting than him? Fucking cancelled. Studio shut down. Monolith! You know their legacy? What they contributed? Done. Because the clowns who brought a Suicide Squad spent 8 years fucking them about. I'm a fan of Assassin's Creed. I know, it's rough, but it's not hard to understand. You can't get this anywhere else. Assassin's Creed can sometimes feel cursed, to lop off a limb for each and every time it takes a step forward. It feels like we've been almost there 14 times in a row. I'm also a fan of Destiny, by the way. Watch Dogs Legion. I was more hyped for that shit than Cyberpunk. What an idea. Could've worked. Franchise is gone because it didn't. Almost There is punished far too harshly. Imagine Mafia 2 without the cut content. Mirror's Edge Catalyst. I love that shit. Fuck. Almost good, almost great, almost real, but not quite, because if the investors see a dip in the quarterly earnings report, then the same executives who couldn't sell bamboo to a fucking panda are gonna have to call Cindy in the assistant's office to tell their coke dealer, probably named Marco, to only bring half a kilo to the yacht party. Almost There and me have got some unfinished business. We live in one of the most backwards-facing times in the history of gaming. No one wants to take risks, and established IP is safe. We live in a remaster culture. We're bringing back the past because the future's too scary. necessary. But in spite of all that revision, it is simply not the done thing to go back and improve. We're allowed to go digging around in the guts of the art style and replacing all the flesh with styrofoam, but we wouldn't dare add the finishing touches. We traded the director's cut for the remaster. The remake might change it all, but we exclusively remake games that were already good. When there's a profit incentive, the logic behind the retry inverts. It's only the games that don't need to try again that get a second chance. The reason Assassin's Creed Unity takes up so much space in the consciousness of the Assassin's Creed fanbase is because it's a broken mess that stands unmoving and unmovable 3 fucking inches away from being the game people always wanted Assassin's Creed to be. I mean, you can't fix the story, but who needs a story when this can happen? If the game decides to work, wouldn't it be nice to live in a world willing to give it a 3-inch push? Probably not, because that'd be an even less forward-facing world than the one we live in now. But let a man dream. Some games make you feel like you're playing the trailer for the game they should have been. Watch Dogs is like that. But Watch Dogs got better. In some ways, it still doesn't measure up to the trailer. But to tell you the truth, I'm no longer frustrated by the fact that it doesn't. I'm not disappointed anymore. That's a catharsis I'm just not used to feeling. It's a fuck you. It's revenge. And I believe it was Aidan Pierce who said that revenge is actually awesome. I don't know what's next for Watch Dogs. It's enough for me to know that something human will decide. I don't know what Watch Dogs will be remembered for. The crowd tech, maybe? I hope it'll be remembered for the strength of its atmosphere. Its soundtrack? That'd be nice. But come on. Watch Dogs will always be the franchise that disappointed, the franchise that lied, and that so rarely escaped from mediocrity. This isn't going to change that, it's a fucking mod. There is no new Watch Dogs like it's some universal thing, a redemption like those the biggest failures in the industry covet. The new Watch Dogs is just for some of us. So it'll be a small thing, said in a whisper, I know that. But I hope now, above all, that Watch Dogs will be remembered for showing us that almost there doesn't have to be forever. Yeah, the score's 196 to almost there, but there's something else Aidan said when he looked out at the world and realized the tides weren't going to turn. Some fights are worth losing. I'd like to take a moment to thank the people who helped me with this video. Parallel Lines, Hey Slick That's Me, and Lex were absolutely indispensable and deeply generous with their time. I'd also like to thank Mr. Bubsy J. Wubbus, DVD Blu-ray, Epic Streamman, and Tom Anyone, really the whole Watch Dogs modding server too. If you're interested in a modded version of Watch Dogs 2, Slick's the author of the extended mod pack, which has some really cool additions, so there'll be a link in the description for that. But for now, I should probably talk you through how to play the new Watch Dogs. Well, good news is, it's extremely easy. The bad news is, not if you want to be picky with the mods. Watch Dogs mods conflict with each other. A lot. So people with a little time and know-how create custom merge files, which is essentially a collection of numerous mods in the size and format of one. That's where the extremely easy comes in. Downloading a popular merge is how most people mod their game. It's as simple as finding the game's installation folder, then datawin64, making a backup of patch.dat and patch.fat because you'll want those back to uninstall the mods, then dragging the contents of the merge into that folder and adjusting the config files to your liking. I would personally recommend starting with a Fox mod off. Now, recommendations. Use the Brutalist merge, or if you'd like a version of the Living City that's a little more generous with the event spawns, use DVD Blu-rays merge. You do not need to make a new save, but I would highly recommend it for experiential reasons. You also do not need to worry about problems with your save if you want to install, and that's pretty much it. So, thanks for watching. I'd also like to give special thanks to That Boy Aqua and Melanie for their voices and for the Spider-Man 2 footage, and Chimera in a Suit for helping me with an edit for this video. He's really one of the most talented names in the business, so if you're in the market for some CGI or video editing, his links will be in the description. And thanks to my patrons too. L. Hudson, Lex Williams, Andre Baltuta, Holy Shift, Dennis Williams, Combat Wombat, John Lemley, Dylan Schaefer-Murphy, Have a Nice Day, Dan Walker, DJ, Weak Sentry, Chino, Chase Baker, Dogs Ate My Pancreas, William Vossler, Joe Simmons, I Pay My Cam Girl So Why Not You, Arcturus, Navy Husky, MT the Poet, Deluxo, Dr. Pavel, Carlos Skibber, Enzo, John C, Corey Walterbeek, Monochrome Only, Ethan Seach, Pib, Fat Guy 988, Purple PP, Joshua Lovejoy, Veda, James Kittle, Cole Bramlett, White Light Best Girl, Tentmaker Kafka, New XC, Very Professional Dodo, Douglas Totally Straight Up Anonymous Yo, Mark Carter, Nikita Shoshin, Dog Best Dog, I echo-locate my husband using your voice, Nebulous Rascal, Bumble, Grumble, Double, Crumble, Bumhole, Pummel, Shovel, Puddle, Huddle, Jumble, Tidemore, LA Lockwood, Anna Haig, Fox Hunt, Logan Briggs, Eddie, Rams, Daryl Tankersley, The Lightweight wait white light wait to light late whites, Oh My God Why 2, Robert Thompson, Hope.exe, Hamburger Discord, XD Shadow Frog, Chan, Triplicate, Pugsley the 4th, M Jets, Shooting Sharp 34, and Microlapse.